All right, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. The topic of my presentation is mining and mineral development, or mines branch participation in government land use decision-making processes. My name is Stephen Hinchey, and I'm a land use geologist in the Mineral Lands Division of the Mining and Mineral Development Branch, which we call the Mines Branch for short. We are part of the Department of Industry, Energy and Technology. When we say land use, what are we referring to? For starters, we're referring to mineral resource land uses of mining, exploration, and quarrying. As we know well in this room, each of these industries depends on access to land. But there are many other land uses and land values, everything from wind development, conservation, forestry, agriculture, housing, water use, indigenous use, carbon sequestration, wildlife, and so on. What's the bigger picture of how land use is governed? In the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, there are 15 departments and 24 Crown agencies. 8 of these are involved in managing land use, to say nothing of different branches and divisions. Then we have other levels of government, the federal government and municipalities, as well as indigenous governments and organizations. We also have holders of land rights, for example, timber rights, wind nomination areas, various property rights, and other stakeholders, including the broader public. Who are we in the bigger picture? The Department of Industry, Energy and Technology is one of the 8 departments and agencies involved in managing land use in the province. Our departmental mandate includes the supervision, control and direction of all matters relating to the promotion, exploration and development of mineral and energy resources and related industry developments, including mines, minerals, quarries, and quarry materials. Our department includes the Mines Branch, responsible for the mining, exploration, and quarrying aspects of the mandate. The department also includes the Energy Branch, responsible for such industries as wind, hydrogen, and petroleum. The Mines Branch, in the bigger picture, is merely one organization among many who have a role to play or provide input in making decisions governing land use in the province. Other organizations include the Energy Branch, as already mentioned, and various other branches and divisions of government responsible for mandates as varied as environmental assessment, crown lands, wildlife, protected areas, water resources, and forestry, to name just a few. These are in addition to the other levels of government, indigenous organizations, and various other rights holders and stakeholders, which can have a big role in either governing land use or providing input into decisions concerning land use. How does the Mines Branch function in relation to land use decision making? The Mines Branch consists of 3 divisions. Under the authority of our minister, the Mineral Lands Division issues mineral and quarry rights, approves and regulates exploration work, approves and regulates quarrying. The Mineral Development Division approves and regulates mining. In approving and regulating mining, exploration, and quarrying, these are not just one and done processes. Each of these functions is really a life cycle process from the regulatory perspective. For instance, the cycle between staking and cycles of exploration, the cycle of gaining exploration approval, carrying out the work, rehabilitating the work, the cycle of applying for approval, getting approval, compliance, and so on. Here I have a generalized model of how the activities that we regulate in the Mines Branch get approved. So mining is approved after release of the project proposal from environmental assessment and the acceptance of a development, reclamation, and closure plan by the Mineral Development Division of our department. Inputs from other parts of government and from other organizations and stakeholders is captured by the environmental assessment process. At least that's it in a nutshell. Exploration is approved based on the collection of feedback through a referrals process that we administer in the Mineral Lands Division, which collects inputs from other parts of government, as well as from those major stakeholders that are included in the process, such as Corner Brook Pulp and Paper and Newfoundland Power. So too with quarrying, which is approved through a very similar referrals process. Sometimes exploration and quarrying are required to also undergo the environmental assessment process, which, as already mentioned, serves to collect the same kinds of inputs. When you get your approval for one of these activities, mining, exploration, or quarrying, a service has been rendered by government to clear the path for your activity. Whether it's an exploration approval or a quarry permit or authorization to mine, government has, in effect, taken an integrated land use approach to reviewing the proposed work and authorizing these activities. The window analogy represents what I mean. The window represents comprehensive reviews reflecting other mandates and interest. The window represents proactively preventing land use conflicts, addressing issues and concerns, and allowing for the accommodation of multiple land uses in an area. These review processes attempt to turn a complex picture of land use considerations, the challenges as referenced by Ms. Jones, into an approval for your activity. To issue an approval for mining, exploration, or quarrying could not be farther from simply producing a widget or an exercise in rubber stamping. Even though we review, at minimum, several hundred applications for exploration approval a year and over 100 quarry permit applications, we frequently encounter new scenarios, new complications to problem solve in working towards approval. What I'm describing to you is the daily work of people like exploration approvals geologist Bernadine Lawler, as well as the people in the quarry section. We've covered those activities that we approve and regulate. But for other decisions concerning land use that are made by government, the Mines Branch generally has an opportunity to provide input. The Mineral Lands Division is responsible for coordinating the input of the branch into those decision-making processes. We now have 2 land use geologists who do this kind of work full-time. I'm one of them, and I'd like to give a shout out to my colleague Kim Morgan, who recently joined our team as the other land use geologist. And others in our division are regularly involved in this work as well. The Mineral Lands Division seeks input as needed from other divisions in the branch. For instance, we very often rely on the geoscience work of the Geological Survey of Newfoundland and Labrador in the areas of paleosites, mineral deposits, aggregate mapping and sampling, and coastal and slope hazard potential to inform the input we provide. When we talk about government decision-making concerning land use, what type of decisions are we talking about? Well, there are many, as you can see from the examples listed. Let's define 3 broad categories. There are laws, regulations, and policies affecting land use. Anything from minerals and quarries legislation, environmental assessment regulations, off-road vehicle regulations, policies to develop in a water supply area, and so on. There are land use designations that are made, anything from wind land reserves, protected areas, areas intended to protect species at risk, silviculture areas, agricultural development areas, so on. And then there are authorizations to use a specific piece of land. And general categories of that would include authorizing temporary occupancy, granting or leasing land, releasing projects from environmental assessment, and of course, authorizing the activities that we regulate as well. Before we get into the numbers, let's review more specific examples of authorizing the use of a specific piece of land. So specific examples include pretty much everything, including cottages, residences, subdivisions, commercial, industrial, agricultural, wind and hydrogen, access roads, recreational trails, you name it. Authorizing the use of a specific piece of land most commonly takes place by an application for Crown land and the issuance of some form of title or authorization under the Lands Act. But many specific land use proposals also have to undergo the environmental assessment process. For instance, wind projects, transmission lines, some agricultural projects, cottages within 200 meters of a salmon river. With that said, let's look at the numbers. So each year we provide input on over 40 intra-governmental consultations concerning laws, regulations, policies, and land use designations. Provide input on approximately 50 projects registered for environmental assessment, and between 1,500 to 1,800 applications for Crown land. We review all of them. What sort of input are we providing? Well, forgive me for putting up this block of text, but it bears reading verbatim because this is the substance of what we do. This is the lens through which we conduct our reviews and provide input. The Mines Branch seeks to ensure that the province gains the maximum benefit from its mineral resources, including quarry resources. In providing input, we seek to ensure that mineral resources are not knowingly alienated from exploration or development, that the economic significance of mineral resources is communicated, that the province remains attractive for investment, that mineral and quarry rights are taken into account, that exploration programs and active mines and quarries are not interfered with, that the potential for coastal and slope hazards is identified, and that the presence of former mine workings is identified. We are a full-time voice within government for these concerns. Let's look at examples of some processes where we provide input. First up, environmental assessment. As mentioned, a variety of proposed land uses sometimes, or all of the time, are required to undergo the provincial environmental assessment process, administered by the Department of Environment and Climate Change. When a project is registered for environmental assessment, we review and, as applicable, as appropriate, we raise concerns about potential impacts on mineral and quarry rights holders, access to land for exploration, mining, and quarrying, the potential alienation of resources, and impacts on active exploration, mines, or quarries. If the Department of Environment and Climate Change makes the decision that more environmental assessment is required, then we seek to ensure that the proponent, who proposes the project, assesses for potential impacts on the aforementioned, and we seek to ensure that the proponent proposes mitigations that would address those impacts. So here's a very generalized model of the environmental assessment process. So you have other Government of Newfoundland and Labrador inputs, the various departments, branches, and divisions, various mandates. You have other inputs, public feedback, stakeholder feedback. You have our input as the Mines Branch. These inputs help the Department of Environment and Climate Change decide whether to release, require further assessment, or reject a project. I want to remind the industry associations, companies, and individuals involved in mining, exploration, and quarrying that you can and should provide your direct input into the environmental assessment process if you consider that a project proposed could impact your interests. The next input I want to talk about is the feedback and support we provide to municipalities. Of course, municipalities are another layer of government. Most municipalities in the province, most of the larger ones, and even some of the smaller ones, have municipal planning authority, meaning they have a planning area boundary within which they impose development controls. These controls take the form of a municipal plan, development regulations, and zoning. For these municipalities, council is the authority on whether to authorize land uses that may meet the threshold to be considered a development under the Urban Rural Planning Act. We provide input to these municipalities when it's time for them to review their municipal plan, which is usually every 5 years. Our input aims to ensure that municipalities in their development regulations make a distinction between exploration that does not meet the threshold to be considered development and exploration that may meet that threshold. For instance, prospecting, geophysical surveys, geochemical sampling. These activities are not developments and don't require approval from a municipality. What about other activities like trenching, drilling, access trails for exploration? Well, that's a determination to be made by the municipality. That's their discretion. If the municipality determines that an activity constitutes development, then, strictly speaking, a development permit is required from them to authorize the work, in addition to getting an exploration approval from the province and any other permits that may be needed. We also request that mining, exploration, and quarrying are clearly defined as distinct activities in their development regulations, that the zoning is permissive for allowing mineral exploration over as broad an area as possible, that space is allocated for quarrying to supply the needs of the locality and the region, and that we identify the presence of mineral and aggregate resources that are known, and that we identify coastal and slope hazard potential, and of course identify any former mine workings that may be present and which may present a hazard. And we also engage in community support to municipalities in co-regulating mineral resource activities when they take place within a municipal planning area. So we educate about our industries and activities, we help address concerns, we assist with review processes, we help draft development permits. And this very week, other officials from the Mineral Lands Division are attending the municipality's NL conference in Gander as part of our support for municipalities. There we go. I've described our input and engagement with municipalities. What about your input and engagement? I'm talking about, are you knowledgeable about the municipal plan? development regulations and zoning as it pertains to your industry, to the work you want to do? Do you have a positive working relationship with the municipality? Have you helped them to understand the nature and purpose of your work? Now moving on to a more specific example of a process where we provide input, a scenario we deal with very frequently and which I think will interest a lot of people in this room. When an application for Crown land overlaps a mineral license. So these applications could be for anything, for example, a cottage, an agriculture lease, a commercial development, an access road. So there's various scenarios that we may, that could be the case. So sometimes an application for Crown land overlaps a mineral license where there's been a low volume of work completed and a low volume of work historically. So not much done there. Sometimes it overlaps a mineral license, but the application is still far from known mineralization, indicators of mineralization, or areas where exploration has taken place. Sometimes the application is in the midst of an emerging picture of discovery, an active exploration program getting results. Sometimes an application directly overlaps mineralization or active exploration. In considering these scenarios, there are other factors we consider. Is the application small and out of the way? For certain types of applications, would a shared land use arrangement perhaps be appropriate? What's the mineral potential of the ground underneath that application? Are there plans submitted to our department for exploring in that area? And what's the nature of the work proposed? We're tasked with providing a recommendation to Crown lands in all cases of overlap with a mineral license or an area of historic exploration. We provide an advisory advising that the applicant should expect mineral exploration in the area in the future, explaining what activities might be involved. We describe how mineral exploration is regulated, how it all has to adhere to the environmental guidelines, and so on and so forth. We want to put other land users at ease about mineral exploration. Sometimes we provide conditional approval. For instance, if an agriculture lease is proposed in overlap of a mineral license, but the scenario is closer to the left part of this slide, we generally recommend approval, conditional on shared access with the mineral license holder. However, the more an application leans towards the right, as per the scenarios on this slide, the more likely we are to recommend rejection of that application. We take recommendations for rejection very seriously and ensure that our reviews are consistent, fair, realistic, and based on available data. Some people might rather that the line to reject be moved further to the left on this slide. However, we need to recognize that this is a balancing act for government. The more we reject approvals for other land uses, the less lenience there may be from other government departments to authorize mineral resource uses. The more negative perceptions may be generated towards exploration and mining among the public applying for Crown land. So, in talking about available data, when there has been a significant volume of work done on a license or in an area historically, we will seek out available data and analysis to inform our review of that application. Whether from assessment reports, 43-101 technical reports, news releases, or applications for exploration approval. I would specifically ask, to this end, I would ask everyone to ensure that you present your results clearly, that maps are easy to geolocate, that you provide good compilation reports. A good compilation report is invaluable for everyone's purposes. I would specifically ask companies to remember us when preparing news releases. You may not think we're one of the audiences for them or main audiences, but we are looking at them to help inform our reviews of these type of applications. Try to be specific in your recommendations for future work so we know what ground may be visited in the future, most likely. And provide sufficient detail in your applications for exploration approval for prospectors. I would ask prospectors to ensure the clear presentation of your findings. So follow the guide for the prospector's assessment report form, in particular about depicting your samples on a map. Also, don't hold on to data. Make sure if you find something significant that your find makes it onto the record so that we can use that information to preserve access to that find for future explorers or potentially a mine. Now, the volume of applications we review is extremely high. So go for maximum clarity in the presentation of your results, and realize that only in exceptional scenarios do we have time to reach out to a mineral license holder to get their input. So now that we've looked at some examples, let's zoom out again at the various types of decisions in terms of the level of input, direct input you can have. The lower down on this slide, the less opportunity you have to provide direct input. At the top are the approvals processes that the Mines Branch administers, where decisions are driven, of course, by the application materials you submit. Needless to say, it's very important to submit the best application package you can according to the requirements of the process. Down lower are those decision-making processes administered by other parts of government, including the legislative branch. In general, the more fine-grained and specific the decision, the less opportunity you have for direct input. However, there are two very important exceptions: the Environmental Assessment Process and the WRAC, Wilderness and Ecological Reserves Advisory Council process for making recommendations on protected areas. These are two important processes where you can and should provide your input directly, whether you're an industry association, company, or individual involved in these industries. Here's a very generalized model of government decision-making concerning land use, decisions that could potentially affect you. We advocate on the inside of government for mineral resource land uses as a public interest, as activities that benefit the province. We don't just provide our input into defined processes. We engage with other departments, levels of government, Indigenous organizations, and stakeholders to answer questions and address concerns. But we are just one piece in a larger picture. Where do you fit in the larger picture? It's great for us in the Mines Branch to hear from you. Please keep informing us about your concerns. But you should not limit your advocacy and outreach to us when there are other parts of government, organizations, stakeholders, decision makers who will be responsible for decisions that affect you. Even though we work full-time to represent mineral resource concerns within government, our input into decision-making is not a substitute for your input. If you have any questions, find me around the conference or get in touch with me otherwise. Thank you very much.